Hello, it's me, Jason. The episode you're about to listen to was recorded at RailsConf. We made tons of mistakes and recorded it upstairs in a place they were doing construction. I've tried my best to trim up the audio, get rid of some of that background noise, but it's going to be a little bit of a ride. Nonetheless, though, you can hear Justin Searls, today's guest, really well, and I'd encourage you, if you can, just to work through some of that noise. In the future, when we do these live, we'll do them a lot better. Anyway, thank you for listening to this podcast. Hello, Chris.
What's up, Jason? I see you face to face this time.
I know, it's weird.
Yeah.
It's the first time we've ever done this live, and we are surrounded by tons of sounds and construction, and also our friend Justin Searls.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, and we're all here at RailsConf.
Yes.
So.
Last day, winding down. Justin, if you don't mind, just maybe give a quick introduction.
Yeah, so I'm a software developer. I live in Columbus, Ohio. I have a woefully receding hairline. I'm the co-founder of a software consultancy called Test Double. I guess relevant to this podcast is we've been fully distributed from day one. My co-founder also lives in Columbus, and when we started the company in 2011, suburban sprawl being what it is, we realized we'd be giving up 2 billable hours a day to just, commute to be in the same place simultaneously. And so it was a pretty easy decision to just work from home. And as we hired additional people, we realized, if you want to hire the best people, constraining yourself to one zip code or one metro region is kind of just, an arbitrary distinction. And so it's really cool that you guys are doing this podcast, and I'm excited to talk about a little bit about my story, but also learn a bit about you all as well.
Cool. You want to tell us how you started programming?
Yeah, I feel like there are so many stories of privileged white kid who grew up in the 80s whose parents saw a Radio Shack ad and then got them a computer, and they played computer games, and then they figured out the computer could do other things too. So I don't want to retell one of those. What I will say is that the first time I actually wrote a program was a funny accident. I was on vacation with my family, and Northwest Airline, now Delta, lost our luggage, and so all I had was like my winter coat and my backpack, and it was really hot, and I was an overweight kid and I was uncomfortable, and we were just on the beach, and I didn't have like a swimsuit, I didn't have any appropriate attire. All I had was my homework, which took me like 3 hours to do, and I had a Casio graphing calculator with me, and so I was holed up in this condo for probably 3 days before our luggage showed up, and so I just ran out of things to do, and I started futzing with the calculator, and it had what I later learned to be a varietal of BASIC on it, and so I just, out of boredom, it was a very discoverable interface because like each of the constructs were actually on the function keys, and I could kind of cycle through them, and I could learn like, okay, so if I can figure that out, else, okay, while, and whatnot. No one had ever taught me any of this stuff. And I built a number guessing game where randomly generate a number, you'd give it like a max, and it would pick one, and then you'd, bisect to guess, high, low, or whatever, and I'd play test against my dad. I was probably like 10 at the time, so I didn't really know what I was doing, but it was a lot of fun to just have that feedback loop with my dad. And he'd play with it. And then by like the 4th day, I was building a headless, user interfaceless checkers CLI of giving little like positions to the pieces and the board and all that. Again, completely oblivious to the fact that like mail by chess is like a thing with rules and whatnot. And my dad started playing that, and then pretty quickly our luggage showed up, and I was out playing on the beach, and I didn't program again for 9 years.
Oh, wow.
So,
for 9 years.
Well, yeah, it depends on your definition of programming, I guess.
Sure.
I spent a lot of time focused on like front-end web and, whatever you called then, just HTML and
Gotcha.
CSS and stuff and blogging. But then it took a long time before I was building, applications.
Yeah. The graphing calculator was like where I got started too, like
Really?
building useful stuff, because my dad had a Atari Basic programming book, and we didn't have an Atari, but he gave it to me, and I was like, this is cool. And he was like, well, your like DOS computer we have might work, and we like, I was building calculators and stuff from the book, but it was not useful. But then when I get the graphing calculator, I can code anytime during any class whenever I'm bored and stuff. So it became quickly like entertainment, but also maybe I can cheat on homework, but then of course the trick was you think you're cheating on homework, but you had to learn the math to write your program to cheat, so you didn't need it at the end. So that was pretty funny. Yeah. So what you went into web stuff, what was that for? Just fun, interesting?
I don't think I've ever admitted to this in like our Ruby community, but the thing that got me started was I had several friends who just kind of had fan sites in the mid '90s and late '90s. Fans of video games, especially. And they'd get a high traffic domain name, and we'd suddenly get a lot of traffic for just like what's essentially looks like a GeoCities or AngelFire kind of site. And we'd write, I started by writing like walkthroughs of games and FAQs to like about like like solutions and stuff. And this is before everything had coalesced. For example, there's a site called n64.com, which was later merged and acquired into what is now like part of IGN over this very circuitous link of acquisitions. And there was so much kind of blog roll, I guess what you now call blog roll, although now you'd call it nothing because we don't have blogs like this anymore. But a precursor to blog rolls was sort of like a very lo-fi syndicated content where you'd go to like one of these popular gaming sites, and I'd see another gaming site referenced on there, or like a partner post, and I actually just sent like an email saying, hey, I'd like to get into this. I'd like to like get into game news reporting. And me, a 12-year-old kid. And the great thing about the internet, of course, is no one can see you and card you and stuff. And so I got into this with a guy, and we started covering like live video game events because he was like, from a family that was super connected to journalists. And he and I would stay up late at night covering live events in Japan and regularly get 300,000 unique visitors a day.
Wow.
And I was in middle school, and it turns out he was a year younger than me. And so that was where I cut my teeth on writing, because you'd write a post and then you'd see like you'd realize that like all of these people, especially adults, were reading it. And I would just I would edit my text like obsessively after posting something. So I'd put something up there and then I'd fix, which is how I write code in open source too, right? I just push to master, and then I just feel shame, and then I go and clean it up real quickly.
Sure.
And that made me a much, much better writer. And so I had this on and off experience writing for gaming sites, and then doing my own kind of like comedy blogging up until I went to college. And so the person that I was working with, it was his site, but we were kind of working together. His name's Brian Stelter, and he went on to be a New York Times reporter, and now he's got a show on CNN. So he's cool. Like, he's a big time journalist, and I'm just, still an amateur video game player.
Yeah.
So you say comedy blog?
Yeah, there's probably no evidence of this now, but I started a local. When I was in high school, I worked like a lot of retail jobs, and this is before smartphones existed, and it was a sleepy suburb for the most part, and so like at my Blockbuster where I worked, there'd very often be no customers for 7. If so in Metro Detroit, if the Red Wings were in the playoffs, for example, or the Pistons were in the playoffs, we'd often have an entire 8-hour shift with 0 customers.
Wow.
And I would just stare at a wall, and the 8-minute long little like VHS loop on all the TVs would just kind of continue playing, and I would slip into this meditative coma, just blank stare, and my brain started building kind of imaginative stories, and just keen, interesting, counterintuitive insights about life. And so I would rush home, and I'd just pour out these blog posts that were mildly comedic, interesting little like snippets. And because while everyone else is, I guess, on like a Live Journal or something like that at the time, the fact that I had my own domain name and I was designing my own pages and stuff was sticky enough that like I started to develop like this like fan following within my high school, being like a relatively unpopular kid, just like developing sort of like a persona for myself, which you know you can imagine is a skill that has served me in adulthood.
Sure.
And I started recruiting some of my best friends in high school to like join as like, you know, staff writers, and we started you know, doing webcomics. And by the time we graduated high school, it was just sort of a really interesting little life experience.
That's awesome.
That is really cool.
So you say you're a Blockbuster.
Yeah.
Rest in peace.
I still remember my if you're at one of the two in like Alaska or whatever, my membership number is 226-196-04259 because he had to type that into the fucking console so many times.
So from Blockbuster to Test Double, sounds like from a movie to Test Double, what is that like? Do you what's maybe some of your first programming jobs?
Yeah, you know, when I went to college, I went to a small liberal arts school, and I double majored in Asian studies with a focus on Japanese language and computer science. And, you know, relevant here, of course, computer science, just it never really clicked with me because I didn't have the practical programming experience to contextualize all of the things that my professors were trying to teach. And because I just didn't have that foundation, it was mostly just in one ear and out the other, and I was just, you know, treading water, trying to survive. Every lab exercise and everything was just so precarious, and I'd hole up in the lab for hours and hours and hours, entire weekends, you know, keep the door propped open for bathroom breaks and stuff, and it was as if I was hoping that, like, through some kind of divination, I would suddenly understand, you know, how to implement a red-black tree or something in C++. And it was a very, very, I think, demotivating experience overall. It is, because I didn't learn anything, it hasn't proved to be very valuable in my career, although I felt like 10 years hence, you know, maybe starting a computer science degree as a 30-year-old would have been more successful for me. But yeah, rewinding back to then, I got lucky. I had a kind of like a, you know, some sort of mandatory business tech kind of class elective that all the freshmen had to take, like learn how to use email and Word, and just sort of the basics like that. And the professor happened to be the head of IT for the college. So he's just sort of I guess not a professor so much as just a, you know, a teacher of the class. And he grabbed me afterwards and said, "Hey, how would you like a part-time job down in the IT department? We got this funny little skunk works department, and their job, it was called the Digital Studio. Their job is basically to do little technical one-off projects for professors and for departments that are a little too technical, you know, like can't be done in Excel or MS Access or something like that." And my first crack at it was a project for the library. They wanted to have a free citation generator and bibliography generator, and they wanted it to support different citation standards like APA, MLA, and Chicago Turabian. And I knew nothing about any of this, but they said, you know, look, it's real simple. You just type in names or whatever, and you spit out, you know, the same names and certain semicolons and commas. Like, it's very systematic, and you can probably figure this out. And I didn't have any clue how to do it, but it was such a simple at first problem that I spent the summer making $10 an hour. I think I had a, you know, $1,000 budget or something. And I worked full-time over that summer for $10, living in my friend's parents' houses, you know, like sharing his childhood bedroom, because I couldn't afford a rent. And what came out the other end was a 16,000-line PHP file that had all of the CSS. It was like JSX. It had all the CSS and the JavaScript and the HTML all in one place. And it was basically just an infinite list of if and else conditions for, hey, if you're in this particular style, then put a comma, otherwise put a semicolon. And the subsequent summer, I came back and they had me build a persistent bibliography generator where you can create an account system and have your bibliography sorted and then exported to a Word document. And I just didn't know any better, like that should be hard or that should take a certain amount of work. I just brute forced everything, and like so much successful software in the world, didn't know what I was doing, and it's been used by It's used hundreds of millions of times by millions of people at schools across the world because it's free. So it's part of the curriculum. And it's still like the code hasn't changed in 16, 17 years.
That's cool.
And it's just by far the most successful software I've ever written, and by far the lowest quality. But I learned a lot about the cadence of building an application, right? I would literally sit down with the librarians for lunch and just talk to them and try to understand their work. Like, I didn't understand what information science was or anything like that. Honestly, it probably would have been a better major choice for me, given that, my job as a programmer is mostly just organizing and taxonomy of models.
Sure.
But, that it was through that I learned basic empathy for the user, understanding that this was a big deal to them, even though it was just a stupid $10 an hour job for me. Not to say that $10 an hour was anything to sneeze at. It was a big improvement over my Blockbuster wages.
Sure.
It's where I kind of learned just the basic cadence of software delivery. And I didn't get that from my computer science degree, unfortunately. So it really prepared me, I think, for my next several jobs.
I don't think that's really changed much either in computer science. At least when I was studying last 8-10 years, I dropped out because it felt like I was already kind of in the software development world, and I wasn't learning the things that I use every day, source control,
that was my experience too. Computer science stuff was when we got into the algorithms, I didn't have anything to apply those to, and we had generic examples, and I didn't care. But then there was some stuff where we had an assembly class that was hey, imagine that you're working on the moon rover, and you want to be able to take pictures, and you have the binary data, and you want to compress it and send it back. How do you do that? And it was okay, that's actually cool, and I enjoyed that, but a lot of the other stuff was just not practical, and when you're learning that, in order to get a job, you want to just know practical stuff, I felt like. So I struggled with that too.
I feel like you can either learn programming from the outside in, here's a website, I'm going to open up DevTools, I'm just going to figure out what it's made of, and well, now we have DevTools, which is nice, a review source, and I'm going to kind of just work from the most extrinsic layer, the most visible layer, and just keep peeling back layers, which is what you're referring to, a very pragmatic way to approach things. Might mean that it takes a long time to get a deep understanding of how anything, quote unquote, really works. And then there's the bottom up way, which I've seen be successful, but usually at universities for whom the computer software track is more like a computer engineering track, it's closer to the hardware engineering. Because I agree, my assembly class was most relevant because it was starting at a foundational enough layer that it made sense. The whole thing fit in my head. It was all these sort of middle tier ones that assumed a basic understanding of programming that I just lacked.
Yeah, that was definitely the case for me. When I started, I was in grade school doing that basic stuff, and I didn't understand you could reuse a variable. So your long script, I was trying to make a Hangman game, and I had for every branch where if you get it right or you get it wrong, I duplicated everything with new variables and drew it all out, and then I ended up you could only do 3-letter words to play Hangman because I would go through and have all of those options written out, and I was programming sucks. Super hard. So what led you into Test Double and all that?
So I had back in 2005, I started learning Ruby and Rails, and I had several friends who started doing independent contracting, building little apps in Ruby locally. In Western Michigan, we had a Great Lakes Ruby meetup, and even did a couple of conferences, and I was sort of tangentially there, but I just never felt that attached to new stuff. I don't do startup work. I don't do minimum viable products personally. I just don't get excited about bootstrapping.
How did you find Ruby in the first place, actually?
It was a confluence of two things at once, actually. I was studying abroad in Japan, and one of my homestay brothers was the equivalent of an MIS major in university. living at home, and he had like what then was like a kind of ratty, torn up copy of like an Intro to Ruby, and we talked about the language and how it came from Japan. I thought that was really interesting, and it basically was like Perl with classes, and I was like, okay, well, I get that. And then roughly simultaneously, I guess Rails was like 0.8 or something, and my friends back home who were really into like extreme programming at the time, they were kind of on the mailing lists and hearing about Rails, and they were getting really excited. And so I was hearing about Ruby from Japanese friends and hearing about Rails from American friends abroad. And that's what got me initially plugged in. So when I came back, I was one of the 20 people in Grand Rapids who cared about Ruby. But from there, I just never felt comfortable. It felt too slick. It felt too seat of the pants. I wanted to feel more kind of stable security. I wanted a type system. I wanted a database that had constraints in it, right? And that was very countercultural. I wanted like clear dependencies and understanding, because what I was searching for was terra firma. I was searching for finger holes to grip onto. And so I ended up going to a big accounting firm, doing 2-year, $2 million Java enterprise projects, and I'm really, really grateful that I did that. I wanted to take the stair steps to success, and only gradually kind of get both the work freedom as well as the, I think, dynamism of a more kind of relaxed technical environment, so that I was coming from a place of, I think, just better understanding. I really am grateful for having that backstop of, hey, here's what it's like to be a cog in a gigantic bureaucracy and trying to make things work, and understanding that you're under severe constraints. Because the sensation of having those constraints gradually lifted as I went from a gigantic company to progressively smaller ones just gave a sense of progression and wind at my back in my career. Whereas if I'd started as like a independent Ruby contractor or at a small agency and I've just all I had done for my entire career, I don't think that I'd still have like the breadth of perspective and the scar tissue and the callus that I use to try to provide people who are in harder positions good advice.
Yeah. So what that led you into starting your own?
Slowly. We a lot of us in the Midwest got really excited about talking about those kinds of big companies that are more structurally fixed in their thinking about how to approach buying software and building software. Agile had a lot to offer in the form of, let's make this more collaborative, let's break down walls, let's get people talking together. And so not so much Scrum, but I was really into extreme programming. I was really into treating software as like a hybrid role where you are part of a cross-functional team and you're more in tune with the business value of what you're doing. And so I worked at a consultant company that focused on sort of like agile transformations. And these were like top-down initiatives where, a CIO at a bank or a steel company would see a slick sales demo about how agile was going to, quadruple the speed of their software developers that move too slow. And then they'd buy into that. And I'd show up and we'd do a pilot project and it would go really well. But the buy-in wasn't there because it wasn't, bought into by the rank and file, so to speak. It wasn't a bottom-up thing. It was all motivated about going faster, better, stronger. And even though, when a first project goes well, it can be a bit of a fluke because it's a shock to the system. But like the second project, everyone, the host rejects the parasite in the organization, and the DBAs would move a little bit slower, and you'd start to see more like politicking against us, and the change management people would push back. And what I realized was that this is just not an organic, empathetic way to change how an organization does things. And so when we founded Test Double, it was really on the theory that, yes, all of this experience is good. Yes, understanding systems thinking and DEMing and big concepts that help you design big organizations, that is a very valuable set of perspectives and grounding and skills. But if you want to really make that kind of impact, the best way to do it is to humbly just approach teams and say, hey, I'm a developer. I want to work with you. And build credibility by just getting stuff done, proving that you're competent and that you understand them, get to know their business. You approach their systems and their tools with the same sort of thought that, hey, well, whatever you're doing made you successful, so it can't be all that bad. And go in with an open hand that like you don't have it all figured out, that you don't have like not coming in with this dogmatic like TDD is the one true way kind of thing that a lot of agile consultants would do. And that way, consulting can be a place where you both learn and you teach. And so that's always been our model, is we view ourselves as sort of a blue collar consultancy. What the market's asking for is, I want more senior developers on my team, and we're like, all right, well, we hire senior developers and we can put them on your team, and here's the value add that you're going to get. You're also going to get, after a month, people that you really trust to offer you outside advice on how your whole team can improve. And we don't know what that's going to look like yet, but whatever it is, we will be there with you through it to offer up the idea, to help you implement it. And our promise to you is that we're going to leave your team in a better place than we found it. We're not just going to be added capacity. And when we started working on that pitch, my co-founder Todd Kaufman and I, it's evolved, of course, but when we started working on that premise, it's the simplest business in the world, right? It's just like work for hire. I just show up and do stuff, and we'll do whatever you need to do. It shouldn't have been that hard, but we got so much resistance because at the time, every other agency on the planet seemed to want to be like a city on a hill. Like we had the Pivotal Labs with cooked up the perfect process. You come to us. Don't send your developers at first, just the product owner, and we will get this party started, and then we will have some sort of like handoff ceremony and teach your people, our way of doing things, right? Or we will take on your entire project, and then we will ship you this beautiful software at the other end. And even if you don't understand how to maintain it, you'll just have to trust that it's immaculate and perfect. And that just never made any sense to me. I would much rather be hand in glove with people, and even today, all of our contracts are week to week. We have several clients on year 4 of their week to week contract.
Wow, that's cool.
Because cool. As soon as we stop adding value, as soon as they're able to pick up and run without us, that's fine. We just want to be there to provide the lift that they need when they need it, and we're pretty confident that other people are going to need that help, and it'll work out. And so it's a simple business.
I like that. Yeah, I mean, it makes it, if you were going to hire someone, it sounds just so much different than everyone else, and it's like, yeah, of course, that's what I've been looking for the whole time, but everybody's trying to sell, and it's
so Test Double works according to your website, just some of the employees I know you have, several technologies, not just Ruby.
Sure.
But I think the communities I've seen you specifically most involved in are Ruby and JavaScript.
Yeah.
So I was curious to hear a little more how JavaScript and, if applicable, Node even kind of fit into the ecosystem at Test Double.
Yeah, so the most important thing that I think anyone in the company would tell you is that we're focused first and foremost on people and the human experience of understanding what software is, and then participating in sort of the collaborative effort of figuring out how to take an idea and turn it into a thing that provides some kind of value, whether it's making money or saving money or doing some good in the world. And that is not about Ruby, and that is not about JavaScript. And so what we look for in technologists, first and foremost, our first interview is the consulting interview. Like, how much experience do you have dealing with hard conversations on teams, or dealing with tricky situations? And how would you approach, like, what are your instincts and what's your experience like? And what do you have to offer from just like a perspective angle? And so almost all of our people, they have interesting stories of their own. Most of them, to talk about technologies for a second, most of them are polyglots. Like a lot of people in the company, not everybody, but a lot of people follow a trajectory like I did of, starting in like a big Java or .NET enterprise environment, and then moving to, maybe Ruby, and then moving to like, either JavaScript or maybe a designer language or something. And so having gone through the transition of 3 or 4 different language ecosystems, pretty soon your ability to kind of, it's like the Matrix, right? Like you see through it. You see, you just, you see that every framework that is fit to try to solve a particular class of problem is roughly, fungible. And the hard part is stuff like naming and organizing and being open and honest about progress and being able as a small team to communicate and market your successes and your failures in a way that the broader organization will respect and respond to appropriately. And so hiring people who have experience in a couple different languages, usually that's a good enough marker for us that they'll be able to cut it at any of our clients. And so we got clients, several clients doing Elixir, a couple doing Elm, a couple doing ClojureScript, a couple doing Golang. And while we, of course, try to, meet what the client's asking for, if they need senior people with a very particular skill set, we'll do our best. But in general, like our people are pretty awesome at just catching up to speed on any particular language or framework pretty quickly.
Cool. So just more like senior level programmers that can just adapt.
Yeah.
It's cool. Shifting away, I guess, from the testable life. So the first time I actually came across Justin Searls was RailsConf Kansas City. So I was on the airplane flying to New Orleans, and I was like, scrolling through, and you had posted a talk that you gave literally like the day before. And if I'm not mistaken, it was Sam's talk, and Sam was sick.
Yeah.
And so it was a talk on RSpec. You talked about RSpec for like 10 minutes, and they're like, all right, here's my talk now. And I was so impressed. The premise of the talk was making Ruby great again. And so that really resonated with me at the time. And so I was just kind of curious if you can think back and remember, like, what kind of led you to want to talk about that?
Yeah, so a little added context, I guess. I got a text message from Sam about 10 days before the conference, and we knew each other, and he needed a pinch hitter because he was going through a little health issue, and I mean, I either rejected or failed to apply to be in the conference, and he knew how much I loved attention, and so I was wishy-washy for a few minutes, but then I ultimately said yes. And, he told me, here's the 3 or 4 things that you need to announce about RSpec, but otherwise I don't care what you do. And I decided to just use that time to bring a lot of energy to the room and to tell people that, because what I was hearing at that moment in my role as like a salesperson was tons of founders were getting this advice from their peers. These are non-technical people saying like everything has to be done in Node.js or microservices. Ruby's old and crusty, or Rails is outmoded, or I should never use Heroku because like now it's all about AWS or whatever. And it was just very disheartening because I was like, we're finally at the moment. Like I said earlier, I'm not into startups and MVP. It's just like early life cycle stages of language ecosystems. It's just like I'm not well suited for that. What I'm really well suited for is mature complexity detangling, legacy rescue, renovating software, upgrading hard projects. And Rails and Ruby were finally at this stage of maturity where it's like now we can start dealing with the really fun stuff. Right? Of like, we have all these tools, they work really well, they're mostly stable, and we can just focus on building great things with them. And to have that also be the moment where it's like, all right, well, Rails is done now because it's not in the news, or Ruby's over because it's like mostly stable and the language isn't experiencing a lot of churn, so it's not generating a lot of headlines. Whereas like there's a new JavaScript framework every day back then. It was really, really frustrating to me. And so I wanted that talk to be motivating. And so because that was frustrating, I just wanted to bring energy to people, to give them some, I'm not a motivational speaker by any stretch, but I wanted to give some inspiration to the idea that like, look, like mature is good. These are mature things and we can do great things with them, and they still have a long way to go, but it's going to take a different mindset now. And it's going to take all of us to continually renew and refresh the image of Ruby and Rails, and we do that by being part of an active community. We do that by outreach. We do that by efforts to teach and educate people. And we do it in ways that, like, we have to find a way to substitute the marketing glitz of new buzzwords and new releases of new things. And there's nothing wrong with new things. We'll continue to make new things, but we can't let newness be equated with goodness. And I think that we are such a hype-driven industry that people just assume that new is better, and new is often not better. We know this, version 1 of anything is going to be slower and buggier, and it's going to have not batteries included, and that whole, I think, I've been on, a little bit of a mission to fight against that broader culture, in the same way that we're just a boring company. I want boring code to be fine for the same reason.
That's really good, yeah. It's a hard shift to make in the community to do that, because there's so many people that there's a lot of new people. They're always driven in the new stuff. They're like, whatever I can go find a job in the most or the easiest, and then that shift of people. But it's also probably good in some ways to get rid of some of those people that are just looking for the next thing. So.
Well, they'll always have something to find, right? I mean, and more power to them, because again, people are situated for different stages in a life cycle. Some people want another crack at a new, unexplored territory. They want the Wild West experience, and a lot of those people, maybe they moved on to Elixir in Phoenix, or an entirely different language, and I don't know. I think that's great. There's room for everything.
Mm-hmm. That talk, and then that was the next year, I believe, you keynoted RailsConf. So
2017.
Yeah, and so then that following RubyConf, there was a whole track on like the future of Ruby, which started with the death of Ruby, the continuation of Ruby, and the future of Ruby. And so on these three talks kind of back to back, you've been keynoting, and I'm attending, and I'm like soaking it all in. And so one thing I notice is you just have a great stage presence. You can communicate well. It just seems like you're a very natural public speaker. And I'm curious if that's something you kind of always felt, or public speaking was kind of a thing you just acquired along the way.
It's a muscle. And, you work the muscle out, and the muscle gets stronger. I still say and a lot. The best piece of advice I ever got about speaking was from one of my computer science professors. I asked him on a lark one day. We had small class sizes, so you often just kind of BS with the profs before class. I asked him, hey, do you still get nervous before you teach a lesson? And he said, yeah, every day. You've been doing it for 30 years. And I was like, well, that sucks. And he's like, no, because what I've learned is that the nervousness is a necessary ingredient to doing a good job. It's nervousness by itself, yeah, that leads to all the, the terrible nightmare scenarios of being caught without your pants on or something in front of an audience and getting embarrassed. But when you're nervous and you're sufficiently prepared, he said, that's when you're just on edge and you have this energy, and people can sense that energy and they feed off of it. And that little interaction has been rattling around my brain ever since then, because I have a tremendous amount of nervousness and anxiety, more than the average person. And I also have a capacity to put my head down and prepare deeply, and spend a lot of time going really, really deep, chasing down sometimes absurd things and ideas. And I've designed my entire life around minimalism and the aversion of long-term commitments. And so I think that all I intrinsically bring to the table that's different than the average person is a tremendous amount of anxiety and a tremendous interest in deep, solitary thought. And so the rest is environmental, right? So when I get on stage, it started off as that nervousness would be It manifests itself in a cracked voice, or my brain would cycle through its internal monologue, would just start screaming at me, right? You're doing this, you're holding that wrong. I would spend a lot of time like meta talking about like, and now we're going to enter the part of the talk where I talk about the talk, instead of just like making it. It was my brain making it about me instead of me making it about the experience of the people. And so I did a couple things that have helped a lot. One is when I speak in front of a room, and my brain goes in any direction that says that this is about me and my experience and what I'm getting out of it, I reframe that and I imagine that everybody in the room is worth $200 an hour, and I multiply that by all the people, and I multiply that by 40-minute talk, 0.7 hours. And I say, like, I need to provide them enough value to offset the economic loss of this much time. And how am I going to provide them that value? Like, it means I need to make them feel something after this that influences their behavior or changes their lives in some way. And when I think in those terms, slowly the anxieties that target myself and get all caught up in my own shit, it becomes like an ion cannon that I'm blasting at others. And I'm not that I'm pushing on them, but I'm just trying to share this very focused beam of energy to say, here's this distillation of 6 months of me caring too much about this thing, and you only get 40 minutes of it with me. And that's why I have 700 slides, and that's why I try to be really high energy, and that's why I try to be really, really careful in my language, because I'm trying to convey a very, very stark crystallization about one thing, so that I can just plant in everybody's skull a very tiny little message that might have an impact on some percentage of them. And if I've done that, then mission accomplished, I guess. And it's just taken 10 years of practice to get better at it.
It's awesome. One of the things I think, also most importantly, I've learned from your slides is how to make an emoji an ungodly size.
Sure, yeah.
Your ability to take an emoji and make it 1,000 pixels is bar none.
It's actually easier than you think. But I was proud that this week I was actually able to give a talk with 0 emoji in it.
Whoa.
So big accomplishment for me.
Last thing, I just want to briefly kind of ask you. There's actually a lot more things I want to ask you. We may have to do this again sometime.
Sure.
But this time last year, maybe a couple of years ago, you were talking about how you had set up an iPad as your, like, on-the-go programming device. And I'm just curious, A, if you still do that, and B, what is some of, like, what was the experience and what was the motivation?
So the motivation for me in trying to use an iPad as like my daily driver device is that I think that one of the tremendous things about iOS when it's blown up into a 11-inch format is that it is not a windowing system. Its notifications have relatively granular controls. Those have increased dramatically with the addition of screen time in iOS 12. And I think a lot about how, as a tool, like what I want is something that's lightweight. I want something that's rugged. I want something that is going to be reliable, have a good battery life and so forth. I want something that is connected, having like LTE, So like those check a lot of kind of just hardware geek boxes for me. But most importantly isn't the machine, it's how does my brain respond to the stimuli of like the computing environment that I'm in. And when I'm on a Mac, no amount of apps like Hocus Focus, which focuses you on just one window at a time and hides the background, or another app literally called just Focus, Hey Focus app, that blocks you from certain websites or certain applications. Those are all sort of just papering over this kind of fundamental problem of the lie of multitasking. Because in the 90s, as windowing systems became popular, we were all taught, you'll be able to multitask. You'll be able to do 2 things at once. Of course, we can't do 2 things at once. And yes, it enabled certain activities like copy and paste or dragging and dropping from one context to another, and that is useful. And iOS has, very slowly reinvented these things in a very kind of like, unitasky kind of way. And so it wasn't without its benefits. But I think that what the advent of Windows and windowing systems in general, what they failed to realize was that even if a computer can share a processing time, and theoretically can toggle back and forth fast enough for a person to have two windows open and to be switching between them, we didn't really do enough to acknowledge the attention residue that would leave on a person's brain to be switching back and forth between things. And it wasn't really a problem until phones came around, smartphones, because then the super rapid fire engagement machines of things like Twitter and Facebook and every app trying to be yet another inbox, where Slack isn't just an inbox, it's actually an inbox generation tool where you can have N inboxes across M teams. And so we have so many things to check that by the time you're done checking your 55 different inboxes, well, maybe there's something back in that first inbox. And even if you do a pretty good job of batching that and only checking a few times and not getting overly obsessive about being on top of every single notification that you receive and all those distractions, even if you do all that really, really well, you wind up with a situation where context switching and just your brain taking time to, even if you're doing another task, you're going to be doing it slower because your asynchronous brain is still kind of hung up in the stressors and the thoughts about the other thing that you were just looking at. So, long story short, I really like working on an iPad for productivity because I can just turn everything off and just be on one thing at once. And it really has helped me focus. And, I write faster, I write better, I write deeper when I'm writing on an iPad. I'm able to get through 50 emails probably in half the time than when I'm on a Mac because I don't like responding to email, and if I can just see a little dingus at the top of my menu bar, I'm going to go click the dingus, and then pretty soon 8 minutes is going to pass, and if they go kind of like, well, at this point, let's make a coffee, and then all of a sudden it's noon, right? So, truth of the matter is I haven't gotten to work on an iPad very much because programming on an iPad is just slower and crappier.
Sure.
And I've been doing a lot more programming the last couple of years. And so, boy, my hope is that at some point I can run a VM or something inside of that environment and actually really program, at least the kind that I do.
Right.
That or just batch that up, so that I can work on an iPad most of the time. But frankly, when I travel lately, it's been with a MacBook, a 2018 MacBook Air. Super durable, not as lightweight as I want, not as connected as I want, not as good a battery as I want, too distracting, but it has a terminal app.
Right.
Which is a kind of depressing state of affairs for me.
It's tough. When I bought a desktop recently, I was like, okay, I really want to try this. And I researched it because the new iPad just come out. And I was like, it just sounds nice, like this lightweight device. It just sounded cool, even from a technology standpoint. And then I was like, okay, well, I'm going to try it first before I do anything because I have an older iPad. And it was just like, it was a pain in the ass. Yeah. Trying to, there's terminal apps and you can SSH and they're okay, but it's tough. So.
Yeah. Well, and some of the things that are painful is a good pain that you should be experiencing. But when it comes to the programming side, yeah, it's just not there yet. And someday it might be. Every couple of years I trick myself into thinking, yes, I'm going to do this for real. I'm going to stick to it. And last time was pretty successful because Mosh is a pretty cool format, protocol. For more reliable shell experiences when you're going to have an intermittent data connection. Mm-hmm. It works fairly well, but yeah, there's just too many compromises.
Well, Justin, I can't thank you enough for joining us.
Thanks so much. It's fun.
Right on, yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Any links you want to share, places people can find you?
Well, we talked about websites earlier. Dustin Tinney from our team just launched a rewrite of our landing page at testdouble.com this morning. So that's neat. So testdouble.com is a website on the internet where you can learn about our company. You can find me and whatever I'm angry about at twitter.com/Searls, Searls. And, of course, anyone's welcome to email me as well. I'm Justin at testdouble.com.
Great.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much.